Oh, hi there. You caught me playing Jazz Jackrabbit, a PC game from the 90s. It's a fun old game, and one that I definitely don't mind coming back to now and again. We covered the free Christmas version of this, Holiday Hair 1995, a while back, and it was a great game. But during that episode, I did explain the background of Jazz Jackrabbit. It was quite a groundbreaking experience on the PC for its time, and as a platform game, it really did move the genre along for the PC platform. It was a groundbreaking experience for PC gaming at the time, and although I had played games like it on consoles before, I'd never seen it on a computer like this. But if you want an in-depth background to the game, I do recommend you watch my Holiday Hair video. So what do you say to taking a proper look at this original game in today's episode? I really hope you didn't just say yes, because I can't actually hear you. There is a screen between us, look. See? So, shall we just get on? As with so many shareware games of the era, Jazz Jackrabbit is split into chapters. Typically you would get chapter 1 for free as a way of introducing you to the game. If you liked it, you'd buy the full game with the other chapters in it. You can play it in any order you like, in a similar way to how Mega Man goes, where you can pick up the boss that you want and then you fight through and you pick up the next boss that you want. You can do it like that, but if you want the proper full story, you have to start from chapter 1 and work your way all the way through to the final chapter. But that's not even the final chapter, because if you get Jazz Jackrabbit on CD, there are extra chapters afterward, in a similar way to how you would get an expansion pack back in the old days, or DLC these days. So the end is not actually the end if you've got the final CD version. But let's get back to the story. It's not actually that hard to follow. Let me explain. Jazz Jackrabbit is a kind of hare. He's in love with Eva Earlong, who is also a kind of hare, or perhaps a rabbit. She's a different colour, she may be a different species. She's the princess of planet Caritas, because of course she is. And she's been kidnapped by Jazz's nemesis, because this is a video game and those are the rules. His nemesis's name is Devon Shell, and he's a tortoise. This game is very loosely based on the idea of the story of the tortoise and the hare. So you have Jazz the hare versus Devon the tortoise. You won't see Devon much because he's got an army and he's going to use all this army of tortoise people and other weird freaks to go and try and kill Jazz for him. Devon will either be fleeing from planet to planet in a race to stay one step ahead of Jazz, or Jazz has the worst sense of direction ever. He's got worse sense of direction than I do when I'm trying to get somewhere without the aid of a map. But either way, you're going to have to battle through planet after planet in each chapter of the game before you get a shot of fighting Devon. Naturally, it turns out that you're not fighting Devon, but perhaps someone who looks like him, or Devon will just run away at the end of the battle because this game runs on Super Mario rules. So you only get to rescue the princess at the end of the final chapter. Got that? Good. Let's play the game. First of all, this is a fast-paced game, and you're going to get hit with a lot of quick-moving colours, so expect the experience to be a little bit jarring, at least at first. I get travel sickness very easily, and this game set that off when I began playing it, but I did get used to it, and you probably will too. The experience is very much like playing Zool for the first time in that respect. Zool isn't the only game that this reminded me of though. Take a look at these bonus stages, and you will see what game springs to mind. That's right, it's a combination of Mario Kart and the special stages from the Sonic games. There's no denying it, this is very, very highly referencing. Let's put it that way. I won't say blatant rip-off, I will say definite referencing. It's also using the same type of 2.5D techniques that were used in those early, not quite 3D games to render a seemingly 3D space using 2D sprites. When I first saw the game, it was like it was using a similar set of techniques to Wacky Wheels. You might remember Wacky Wheels, and initially I thought they were coded by the same people, but apparently they're not. It just seems like that, and it seems like in 1994, faking 3D using 2D sprites was all the rage. Jazz moves fluidly and the game runs at a superb speed, which really helps to demonstrate the power of the PC, and back then that was important. Because prior to games like Jazz Jackrabbit, my experience with PC gaming was that it was a lot slower, and a lot more like the games on computers like the ZX Spectrum back in the 80s. Games didn't really scroll, they didn't have a huge amount of colour, and in all honesty, they were pretty lacklustre compared to what I'd been experiencing on 8-bit computers, but I'd moved over to an enhanced 16-bit system. It didn't make sense. Then this green rabbit showed up on my screen and it kicked the PC up the backside. All of a sudden, gaming was it was good, it was fantastic. It was the gaming that I had hoped for when I had first put my eyes on an Amstrad Mega PC, the big 16-bit system that I'd been idolising in Amstrad magazines while I'd been playing on my trusty old Amstrad CPC. It was the game that I expected the PC to be, the game of the future, and I liked it. So you could say I was impressed, because I was. Basically, this is the start of the PC aiming its sights on the Amiga's dominance of home computer gaming. When I'd moved over to the PC 2 years before Jazz was released, I was hoping games would be like this. I really wanted stuff like this, and I was disappointed that often I wasn't getting that kind of gaming experience. My friends were off playing the Amiga and they had stuff like Fire and Ice, the 3D game Nightmare, and stuff like that. K240, remember that? That was a great game. Meanwhile, I had a very low colour version of SimCity and a burning desire to play something that made it look like the PC's power had been unlocked. Jazz Jackrabbit wasn't the hero we deserved, but for PC gaming in '94, he was the hero we needed right then. So the game plays like an explosion in a paint factory. It's bright, it's full of clashing colours, it's superb to look at. The game is a work of art. It also has one of the best soundtracks of any game in the 90s. It's a pleasure for both the eyes and the ears, and I love it. Sadly, I didn't get to fully appreciate the sound back then, because when I first played the game, it was on an Amstrad Mega PC, which came with a built-in AdLib sound card. Now, don't get me wrong, AdLib is good. However, it was never used to its full potential, let's put it that way. It was very much the sound card equivalent of how I felt with PC games, because AdLib could do a lot more than it was given credit for, but all the games were designed to take full advantage of the Sound Blaster card, which I didn't have. So these days, with better compatibility between different manufacturers, there's a lot less of that kind of problem, but back then, in the early days of PC gaming, you paid your money and you took your chance. The game starts off easy. You jump, you shoot, and you occasionally find a secret area on your way through the level. Basically, this whole first chapter feels more like a tutorial. You can kind of understand why. It's surprisingly easy to finish, even on your first try, and it's a nice way of easing you into the game. Episode 2 is where the game proper gets going. You're going to get absolutely hammered into the ground if you don't hone your reflexes, because enemies will fly at you from off screen without a second's warning, so you have to keep your eyes peeled and your wits sharp or you will not make it out of Chapter 2 alive. And the game doesn't let up from there. If you thought PC gaming in the early era couldn't compete with consoles, well, you were right for the most part, but when Jazz Jackrabbit came along, you were dead wrong. This looks like a Mega Drive game, but its roots are right there in Nintendo, as in Nintendo hard. Except for the boss levels. If you've ever thought Sonic's battles against Dr. Robotnik were a little bit easy, well, take a look at this. I'm fighting an end of chapter boss, and I'm not even walking into the area that he's roaming about in. This may seem like a cop-out, but it's basically how boss battles work in this game. Just find somewhere to take cover and shoot the enemy until it explodes. It's the best way, and it works. It might seem cheap, and it is cheap, but it's also essentially how the game's designed. Keep out the way of the shots, and you will shoot back, and you will hit, and it will die. That's how it works. In conclusion, this is a cornerstone of PC gaming history. It plays a lot like a mascot platformer. Its roots feel more like a run-and-gun arcade shooter though, a bit like Contra, that kind of thing, or Green Beret. It's one of those games that marked the time in history when the PC finally came into its own as more than the beige box that your parents did their taxes on. Jazz Jackrabbit could have been the mascot for the PC if he'd starred in a few more games. But sadly, that wasn't to be. In November of 1993, Doom was released, and it ended the platformer as the game genre of choice for PC gamers. So while Jazz showed that our beloved giant monstrosity of a computer could do all of the things that console gamers and Amiga gamers loved, he ended up essentially being a mascot for a time that was already over. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have a fond place in our hearts and all of our gaming memories. For my part, I didn't get my hands on a copy of Doom until after the demos of its sequel started doing the rounds, showing up on magazine cover discs and being handed around at school. So for me, Jazz Jackrabbit did get his day in the sun, and as far as my friends and I were concerned, it was a great game. Personally, I think that was probably the best way you could experience it. I could see the fun, and the game was great. It was everything that I'd wanted for a PC game. But it was the kind of game that couldn't compete once Doom Guy came and blew everything out of the water. So, play it before Doom, and you can't do that anymore. It's one of those games where you had to be there at the time to fully appreciate how groundbreaking it was. But that's not really the end of it all, is it? Because you can still go back and look at it from this point of view. This was a game that was there to show the PC had its abilities to compete with the other computers. In that respect, Jazz did his job. He came in, he showed what the future of platformers on the PC could be. He came late, but he did arrive. And for that, I am eternally grateful. So thanks, Jazz. Thank you for the memories. And I hope we get to see you again one day. If you like the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help create future videos. That's patreon.com/Zoe Kirk Robinson. And I've got an extra special thanks going out to Chief89, Sam Yates, Retro Mickey82, Mo Henry, and George Botterini. Thank you so much, guys.